Steve Chalke, Chief of the Oasis Academy Trust. That represents 52 academy schools across England. Steve, a very good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Simon. Good morning, Kirsty.
Good morning, Steve.
So is this a good morning, or are you still looking through this with a fine tooth comb?
Well, I think it's a tale with two different ends to it. The first is, of course, any money that you receive for education is gratefully received. Every penny counts, every pound makes a difference. And so that's the good news. That's the good end of this. The bad end of it is that this money doesn't get us back to where we were before the coalition government came to power in 2010. It takes us right back to around 2009, actually. So when you think about it, it's not 10 years of cuts, as your report said. It's 15 years of cuts, real cuts in real terms. For 15 years, money has been diminishing in the education system. Just the night before last, I was talking to a psychotherapist who has come in to do some work in some of our schools. And she sat me down and she said, you know, the problem, Steve, is this. You just don't have any learning assistants. You don't have enough support for the teachers. They're too thinly stretched. What are you going to do about it? And I said, well, you're talking about a situation that didn't used to exist. But so many schools, every school across the country has had to reconstruct, reconfigure, restructure its staffing levels so many times as these cuts have come in. So this money doesn't level up. That's the important thing. It might get us back to 2010 by 2025, but it doesn't level up. And then there's a second problem. And the problem is that it doesn't do anything, therefore, to cover all the extra stress and strain and the number of children that are falling behind with mental health issues, with emotional issues caused by the pandemic. And the government's own advisor, Sir Kevin Collins, of course, just a few months ago, said we needed £15 billion to make up for that giant gap. So it doesn't level up. And it doesn't do anything about the pandemic issues, but it is gratefully received. And of course, teachers will always work with what they've got because they love kids.
Let's look further into this. What about the 30,000 new school places for children with special needs and disabilities? I mean, is that enough to help those families? I'm guessing that you're going to say it's not.
Well, yeah. I mean, you guess right, Kirsty, because I guess you already know that even before you asked me the question. So once again, everything that's given is good. You know, it's helpful, but it's just not up to the task. The task is absolutely gigantic. And of course, there are many more children with special needs than there were before the pandemic. That's what you could take any head teacher in the country and place them in front of this camera this morning, and they'd all tell you stories, heart-wrenching stories of the same thing. Children that aren't ready to learn, who can't learn, children who are anxious, children who are worried, young children we have in our schools that aren't potty trained, children that lost reading skills, children that have slipped backwards in terms of their confidence. And this is going to go on for years and years and years. So unless we invest now, we're going to be paying for this throughout these young people's lives as they get older. So there's a social and economic cost, long-term cost, to not investing now, which, of course, everyone would agree. But it's just that this budget doesn't do it.
I just want to pick up there, from my experience as well, with friends with young children who absolutely missed that early interaction because of nurseries or childcare being closed. Is that the key area you would have liked to have seen far more invested into? Is that where you feel that he's not done the right thing?
Yes, I think that's one of the areas. We all know, don't we? We've learned so much about brain science over the last 25 years, since 2000, really. The whole science of brain science, neuroscience, has developed, and we know that those first 3 years in a child's life are essential as their brains make synaptic connections, little pathways, neural pathways through their brain. If they're stimulated, if they have social contact, if they develop confidence, if they're outgoing during that time, then that bodes well for the rest of their lives. We also know that if that doesn't happen, there's always, the brain's always developing, so you can always catch up, but you need to work extra hard with that child. So we've got investment in early years. That is so vitally important. Anyone will tell you that. But then the other thing is for the children in later years, the strange thing is, well, it's not a strange thing. We now know that in your early teenage years, that there's also a stimulation stage where you make more synaptic connections. They get supercharged. So we know that those first 3 years of life are vital, and those years of puberty are vital as well. Those are the two parts of life where you develop the fastest. But if you're entering year 9, that's the third year of secondary school, this year is the first school year that you've actually been in school the whole time. So you've missed out on all that social maturing. And now, of course, with the winter coming up, we, in just a few cases, have begun sending year groups home again because the pandemic's taking its grip. We need to invest, or we will pay as a nation, and individuals will pay for the rest of their lives.
Steve, while I've got you there, I remember talking to you decades ago when you and I had different coloured hair. You had a different hat on back then, and you were campaigning for the homeless. And rough sleepers and homelessness seems to be more prevalent now than I remember seeing it for a long time. I'm just wondering, what did the government announce yesterday? £640 million a year to try and tackle this? Does that touch it?
Well, it's the same story. It's the same story, Simon. Of course, everything that's given really makes a difference. And yes, so Oasis isn't just an educational trust. We work with families and we work with people in need across the country. We work with endless homeless people. We provide beds, we provide housing, we provide medical care to rough sleepers. Back in 2010, well, in the years leading up to 2010, we ran off-street medical facilities, one in central London, very near to where I live. So it was really like a GP's for people who were sleeping rough, who were forced to sleep rough. Do you know, a third of all people who sleep rough on our streets were in our military? It's to do with the psychological impact of being on a battlefield and then not being able to readjust to life. They can't fit back in. For instance. So these aren't lazy people who want to go home and get a job. These are people who are psychologically damaged. Well, there were so many on the streets in the years leading up to the turn of the millennium that we ran this giant centre, and we'd have vet because many people who are homeless, of course, will have a dog who's their only friend, not just their best friend. But as through the first years of the millennium, from the late 90s onwards, so much was invested in the care of the homeless that they all disappeared. And in the end, we shut our centres. Since 2010, we've opened them all and more again. There are more people on the street, more people sleeping rough, more people with mental health issues than I can remember in my working life. We are back where we were. We've moved backwards, not forwards. So this piece of money, of course it helps, but it only helps. It doesn't solve. It won't cure.
Yeah.
I think we need to talk. This is something we need to talk about again.
Yeah.
We're out of time this morning, but Steve, so many issues. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you, Steve.
Great to see you, and thank you very much for all that.